I don't think
Oh,
those
no, I know. I'll have to send it to you. Sure. Getting started.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January meeting of the Squirrel Hill Historical Society. I'm Todd Miller, the program coordinator, standing in for our co-presidents, Jim Hammond, who's enjoying sunny Florida, and Wayne Bossinger. So wanted at this time to acknowledge our board members whose dedication allows the society to flourish, and that's Dr. Gene Binstock, Wayne Bossinger, who I mentioned a moment ago, Toby Chapman, Audrey Glickman, Jim Hammond, Tony Indivina, Stanley Klein, and myself, Charles Suckup, Helen Wilson, and Evelyn Young. I'd also like to acknowledge our newest board member, Todd Wilson. Todd's in the back. So thank you all for your contributions to the Squirrel Hill Historical Society. And as far as membership is concerned, it's the new year, which means that it's time to renew your membership if you haven't already. It's $15 for a single membership, $25 for a couple. And Tony, what's the membership rate running at right now?
We have about 240, 250. I work with Stanley Klein, our membership chair. The email memberships is about even. We have about the same number who have to renew yet as who have renewed. We're in the grace period now, and we are going to send out mailings. So if you pay before we send out mailings, you save us the postage.
All right, thanks, Tony. And we also have in the back of the room, after the meeting, Squirrel Hill Historical Society 2023 calendars for $20, and then also for $20 a copy of the book that our speakers will discuss this evening. And we're pleased to have award-winning journalists Marylynne Pitz and Laura Schneiderman here as our speakers. They're co-authors of the... Oh, sorry, Helen?
I have 3 announcements.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay. Sorry. Hello, everybody. 3 short announcements. One is about the calendar. If you haven't checked it out, it's full of vintage photographs. I was one of the people who put it together, and it's the proceeds benefit mostly the Squirrel Hill Historical Society and partly to the Squirrel Hill Urban Coalition, so it's strictly a volunteer effort. But if you haven't looked at the pictures, you have to check them out. And second thing I wanted to say was that if you saw in the newsletter that we're starting to partner with the historic Pittsburgh website, Pitz, University of Pittsburgh, historic Pittsburgh website, to put Squirrel Hill photographs, our collection, and they're original photographs, not the ones that we've gotten from elsewhere. But if you look in your attic and you find some photographs of Squirrel Hill, especially of buildings, lend them to us. We will scan them and give them back to you. But we'd love to see more photographs because we don't have a lot of this, especially the business district. Okay, and the third announcement is one of our members, Yihan Chu, is not only a member of our group but also of this church, and on First Fridays your piano playing is just absolutely incredible. And would you like to say?
Well, I just wanted to say that Paul Connolly and Helen and several other members had heard me play, so I do play the piano.
Very well.
The church here, every first Friday, they present a free concert. I'm on the March 3rd, month. So if you're free, come and listen to some music, and for 1 hour, 12 noon to 1 o'clock, I will play Haydn, and a composer friend has written a special piece just for me, and haven't heard it already, because I'm a neighbor of Betty Connolly, to introduce myself with Paul, so I see. For her memorial, I had a few people come together, including a few people from here, and then I more or less kind of explain what music I had talked to Betty about, so including this piece that nobody else had heard yet, because it's a secret, it's a premiere at Pittsburgh when I played here on March. But I said I did talk to Betty about it, so I said that's only appropriate that I should play it at the memorial. So I will play that, and I play some Debussy, good music. If you are free, just come. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. So our speakers tonight are Marylynne Pitz and Laura Schneiderman. They are co-authors of the recently published book, Kaufmann's, The Family That Built Pittsburgh's Famed Department Store. Over the next hour, they will discuss the indelible mark the Kaufmann family's department store and philanthropy have left on the city of Pittsburgh, including Squirrel Hill, and on western Pennsylvania. Marylynne is a Pittsburgh-based arts journalist, and Laura is a Post-Gazette assignment editor and interactive developer. So at this time, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Marylynne and Laura.
Thank you, Tom. Did you know that the Kaufmanns were instrumental in building Point State Park and the Civic Arena? Well, a lot of people don't know that, and we're going to discuss it with you tonight. A lot of people ask us where we got the idea for writing this book. Has anybody seen the name Irene Kaufmann anywhere? When I saw the name Irene Kaufmann at the JCC, at the Jewish Community Center, I pictured an older lady who had given a lot of money and gotten her name on the building. But as I learned in 2009, that wasn't the case. I was here I was at the Sixth Presbyterian Church at a Squirrel Hill Historical Society meeting when Barbara Burston was giving a presentation about one of her books that had come out, and she said, sort of as an aside, that Irene Kaufmann had swallowed carbolic acid at the age of 19 and killed herself. And the whole room went, ah! And then she said that her mother had thrown herself, 10 years later, thrown herself out the window of the Ritz-Carlton in New York. And again, the whole room gasped. So then I kind of knew that people in Pittsburgh know about Kaufmann's, the department store. They don't know about the Kaufmann's family. So many years later, when Marylynne and I were working at the Post-Gazette, Kaufmann's was going to close in 2015, and we decided to write Marylynne was going to write the story, and I was going to make the website. We collaborated on the research, and when the website came out, boom! We were inundated with comments, phone calls, emails, comments at the bottom of the story on the webpage. And when we looked at the analytics, which means how many people are looking at your website, we saw that our website about Kaufmann's had more people reading it than had read the story about the Pittsburgh Steelers that day. And when you get more people reading your story than the Pittsburgh Steelers, you know you're on to something. And we said, we are on to something. And so we went to the Pitt Press and got the book published.
So, can everyone hear me okay? All right,
Yes.
okay. So the Kaufmann family originated in Germany, and they had a monopoly on horse and cattle trading. It was a large family. They lived in a town called Fernheim, which means Fern home, sorry. And in 1871, Jacob Kaufmann decided that he was going to leave Germany and come to America. When he came here to Pittsburgh in 1871, he started at the very bottom of the economic ladder in the retail world. He peddled, which meant that he walked all over southwestern Pennsylvania in all kinds of weather. And after about a year, he was able to save enough money so that he could bring over his brother, Isaac. And together, they peddled all over southwestern Pennsylvania. Their customers were mostly people who worked in steel mills or in coal mines. They probably lent money to their customers. Their customers probably bought things on the installment plan. Eventually, they got a horse, then they got a horse-drawn wagon, so they weren't walking anymore. And then in 1871, they opened a store on the south side. And it was about the size of a tractor trailer. And their customers there were the people who worked at Jones and Laughlin steel mill. And here is a nice picture of Jacob. You can see, thank you. This one. You can see in the picture here, he's wearing a carnation. This is sort of him at the height of his prosperity in the late 1880s. And he liked to go to a florist every day and have a fresh carnation in his lapel. And he liked to wear diamond-studded cufflinks.
So eventually there were 4 brothers who were working in what became Kaufmann's, the department store. And these are the 4. We're kind of introducing them to you. This is Jacob, who we just spoke of, the oldest brother, and his wife, Augusta. Then next to him, oh, I'm so sorry. Next to him is Henry and his wife, Teresa. And next to him is Morris, behind the hat, and his wife, Betty. And then here is Isaac and his first wife, who died young, Emma. Now she is the namesake for the Emma Kaufmann camp, if anybody has heard of that.
Now this is an early iteration of the downtown store, and you can see here is a statue that they called the Goddess of Liberty, and every evening one of the Kaufmann's employees would go up and light this gas lamp so that this could be seen all over Pittsburgh. So this is sort of an early iteration of the store. This is about, I think, the 1885, we think this is, yeah. And they called this store the Grand Depot. They advertised daily and frequently about their fair dealing, their low prices, and their quality goods. And in 1885, they hired their first female sales clerk. They didn't have to go far to find her. She worked across the street at the restaurant where they ate pancakes every morning for breakfast. They decided that she had enough business acumen to work in their store.
So eventually the brothers became very prosperous. They were doing the kinds of things that the Gilded Age millionaires of the time did, advertising their daughters' debutante balls in the newspaper, and who they were calling on, and what parties they were having, and living in very nice houses with servants on the north side, and later in Squirrel Hill and the other parts of the East End. But as they got older, they began thinking, well, what's going to happen to our store when we retire? So there are 4 brothers, as we said, Jacob, Isaac, Morris, and Henry. That's the order of their birth. And as they thought about, well, who are we going to leave it to? Of course, they're only going to leave it to sons, right? Because daughters, women at that time did not run stores. So who shall it be? Jacob had 5 sons, any one of whom was capable of taking over the store, but the brothers had a deal. if one of them died, and this was a very common arrangement, the other brothers would buy out his share from his survivors. And that's what happened. Jacob was the oldest, and he died first, and the other three brothers bought out his share, but his widow was not happy. She thought she was owed more, and she took them to court. And not only that, all the 5 brothers, plus miscellaneous cousins amounting to about half the staff at Kaufmann's, left to open their own department store 2 blocks down the road, which became Gimbel's. So they're out, right? They're not going to take over the store. So who's left? Isaac has a daughter, Lillian, and Henry had one daughter, Irene. We mentioned that she died young. And Morris has 2 sons. Well, the oldest son is the one that they groomed to take over. And he ended up marrying Lillian.
Married his cousin.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
He did marry his cousin, yes. And that was more common than you might imagine. And actually, Queen Elizabeth II married her 3rd cousin. Anyway, this is 2 views of Irene Kaufmann. We're going to just sort of compare and contrast here. On the left, you can see she's got her hair done up in the Gibson girl hairstyle. And she has her hands in front of her, and she's looking very docile and very Gilded Age lady in this elegant satin or silk lilac gown. But on the other side here, we have a picture of Irene Kaufmann on her horse. And if you look closely at her face, you can see that this was a very high-spirited, headstrong young lady who had lots of friends. She loved to ride horses, she liked to drive the family car, and she liked to shop. The Kaufmanns were German Jews, she was the only child of Henry and Teresa Kaufmann. And when she died, they did their very best to honor her memory by giving an organ to Congregation Road of Shalom in Shadyside. But I think most Pittsburgh residents remember Irene Kaufmann for the Irene Kaufmann Settlement House. And that was the place where generations of immigrants from all over the world came to learn how to speak English, how to become U.S. citizens. They also got health care there from a wonderful nurse who actually lived in the settlement house. Her name was Anna Heldman. And then, of course, there were a whole array of social activities. Immigrants learned how to paint, how to put on plays, how to swim. Samuel Rosenberg, who later went on to be the professor of Andy Warhol, taught art classes at the Irene Kaufmann Settlement House. So it really was a key landmark here in Pittsburgh.
So we mentioned before that Edgar married his first cousin. I'm so sorry, this is very, very sensitive. Edgar married his first cousin, Lillian, who went by Lillian. This was not unusual among Jews in Europe. There were often small communities, not many Jewish people within the community, so you married who you knew. In fact, Isaac, here's a picture of Isaac, Lillian's father, was married to his first cousin, Emma. Now, marrying your first cousin may have been common in Europe, but it was not common or even legal in Pennsylvania at the time that they got married, which was 1909. So they had to take a special train up to New York to get married, and that is what they did.
So this is a picture of Lillian Kaufmann as a young woman, and she was raised to be a philanthropist. Her father, Isaac, was a very generous man, gave money to the University of Pittsburgh Hospital, and she was also, in the 1930s, the founder of the famous Vendôme boutique that was on the 11th floor of Kaufmann's. She actually conceived the idea for the Vendôme during the height of the Depression. She wanted to get she wanted to find work for women who were seamstresses and jewelry designers. And so she basically started designing clothes and jewelry, and she had local seamstresses and local designers make them. And then eventually she started going to Paris to buy all kinds of designer clothing and antiques for the Vendôme, and that's why she named the Vendôme the Vendôme. She stayed on the Place Vendôme in Paris when she went on her buying trips. She also was an art patron. She loved the work of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, his famous wife, and they were guests at the Kaufmann's home. And she was also a very dedicated volunteer at Mercy Hospital and also at Montefiore Hospital. In fact, she was the only woman to chair the board of Montefiore Hospital, something she did for 10 years and something no other woman has ever done.
So let's talk a little bit about her husband, Edgar. Edgar was sort of the golden boy. He was sent to Shadyside Academy. He also went for a year to Yale. He was served as kind of an apprentice in Europe at the finest department stores in Paris and Frankfurt. And he worked for a year in Connellsville in some store that nobody's been able to pin down yet. He is dressed as an equestrian here because they had horses and raced horses, just like the horse he said up in Sewickley. He liked people. He wanted to make retailing a white-collar profession, so he actually started a college major, first at CMU and then at Pitt, where you can major in retailing. He was a big risk taker. Professionally, this worked out for him quite well. Personally, much less well.
Yeah. So here we have the first house that Edgar Kaufmann built. He hired a well-known society architect named Benno Jansen to design this house. It still stands. It's out on Pasadena Drive in O'Hara Township. It's owned by a businessman named Dennis Kelleher. It's called La Tourelle, and you can see it takes its name from this tower that's at the front of the house here. And it had 18 rooms. It had a special sink where you could wash your boots when you came in from the stables. And there were two famous house guests who stayed here. Albert Einstein, the great scientist, came here to Pittsburgh in the 1930s. He was a house guest here at La Tourelle. The Kaufmanns were both fluent in German, and Edgar Kaufmann served as Albert Einstein's translator when Einstein was here. And the other famous guest who stayed here was Frank Lloyd Wright. And in the living room of this home, he actually began sketching designs for Falling Water. This house was built in the 20s, and it's sort of what you'd call a Norman chateau.
This is another house that Edgar built, quite different. This one is in Palm Springs, California. It is called the Neutra House because they hired Richard Neutra, to build it for them. Although they had Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect, design many other items for them, including Falling Water, they chose Neutra to do this house, maybe because Neutra would listen more to his clients and would build things to suit them rather than insist that they adapt themselves to what he thought they should have. So this was called the Palm Springs House, and we just wanted to acquaint you with it.
I just want to add that the Palm Springs house that we just showed you was actually listed last year for sale, and the asking price was $26 million. It didn't sell for that price. It sold for about $13 million.
Who bought it?
I don't know who bought it. No, sorry. Somebody with a lot of money. Let's go to the next slide. Edgar Kaufmann was a very important civic leader, cultural leader. He was determined that the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera would have its very own permanent performing arts space. And that's why the Civic Arena was built. And there were a lot of other places that were considered as the potential site for this arena. Initially, they wanted to put it in Highland Park. Then the residents of Highland Park rose up and said, hell no. And the same happened when they tried to put it in Schenley Park or near Schenley Park. So they wound up putting it in the Lower Hill District because at the time, many people believed that the Lower Hill needed to be cleared of slums. Unfortunately, that meant that 10,000 families lost their homes, and a lot of great jazz clubs that many of us remember or have read about also disappeared. A lot of black-owned businesses lost their place of business as well. Edgar gave $1 million to build this building. And it turned out that it was not such a great building. The acoustics were bad, and the microphones were bad. And it turned out also that they hadn't even thought about having enough restrooms for the backstage people. So unfortunately, it really didn't turn out well as a performing arts venue for the Pittsburgh Civic Light Opera, which later moved to the Benedum. Edgar also was a forward-thinking person in terms of he, during the Great Depression, when 1 in 4 Americans were out of work, he came up with this idea that local businesses would give a percentage of their income, and that money would be set aside so that people in the city of Pittsburgh could work on public works projects, building roads, etc. And it worked very well here. Edgar thought it should be used nationally, and he even went to the White House to argue for that. But he also served as what's called a $1-a-year man in Washington. This is something that other famous people have done where they lend their expertise to the government for a nominal $1 a year. Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates have also done this.
One of the unusual things about the Civic Arena, which, does anybody remember that? Why am I asking?
It was built because the Civic Light Opera used to be in Pitz Stadium.
That's right.
And with the rain and everything.
That's right. They used to use the Pitts Stadium, but June is always a rainy month here, right? So
And the airplanes buzzed over.
So-
and
So that didn't work out so well because then they had July and they had August, and then of course the football team would need the stadium, so they couldn't make up the June dates in September. So that's why they sought their own venue, and Edgar had the idea that it should have a roof. He made motion like this to the designer, that it should be like a mother hen sheltering her chicks. So it had this retractable roof. This is a rare photo of the roof fully retracted. And the reason it's rare is because it didn't often work very well. And when it did work, the breeze came in, and then you couldn't hear the performers. In fact, when Carol Burnett, she was the first one to perform when they had the venue, and she said, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the sky, and they retracted the roof, and then she was shivering because it was so cold and nobody could hear her. She said, how do you shut this thing? So,
And then it became too expensive to open and close.
Yes, exactly. This is Edgar Kaufmann Jr., and really primarily he was the only son of Edgar and Lillian Kaufmann. And early in his life, he went to Europe to study painting. He spent a lot of time in Europe learning to paint. He came back to Pittsburgh in the 1930s, and he was sort of at loose ends. He hadn't quite figured out his path in life. And he read Frank Lloyd Wright's autobiography and decided that he would go and study architecture with Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin. He didn't spend a lot of time there. He was only there for about 7 months. He really wasn't interested in taking over the Kaufmann's department store business. He did work in the store for a while in the furniture department, but ultimately he wound up becoming a curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and that's where he organized exhibitions of what was called good design. And we think mostly the exhibitions that he did were mid-century modern furniture and housewares, things that are very collectible today. He also, he provided basically the introduction of Frank Lloyd Wright to his parents because they came to visit him when he was at Taliesin, and that's how the Kaufmanns came to hire Wright to design Falling Water for them. One of the best things Edgar Kaufmann Jr. did for us was he gave Falling Water to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and it recently became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's attracting more visitors than ever.
In 1930, when Edgar and Lillian were running Kaufmann's, and they were a young couple and they were a power couple, they decided to make a total break with the past and remodel the store's first floor. Now, up to this time, the store was very Victorian looking. It had dark furniture, dark cabinets. You had to ask a salesperson to get the goods out of the cabinet to view. And they decided they wanted to make it sort of an Art Deco palace. Okay, and they also decided that they didn't want to spare any expense. Never mind that the stock market just crashed and people are jumping out of windows and losing their life savings. So this is a picture of the first floor after they remodeled it. They took out, in 1930, a full-color supplement to this Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph newspaper entirely to advertise their redesign. And you can see here the black Carrara marble pillars. Those are not trees, those are marble pillars from Italy. And the commissioned murals by Boardman Robinson, which illustrate the, illustrate the history of commerce, because of course they want to educate you, okay, and bring your taste up and make you aspire to buy more things of a nice nature, perhaps in their store. And the blonde wood cabinets set at a diagonal. So they really wanted to make it an Art Deco palace that was sleek and elegant and not fussy and dark like the Victorians.
After the remodeling of the store, the next big project they took on was Falling Water. The Falling Water opened in 1937. This is the house that they built that was built over Bear Run Creek, and it made the cover of Time magazine and other major architectural magazines. And Lillian called it leaking water. If you know anything about Frank Lloyd Wright, it's sort of consistently true that the houses that he designed, the roofs often leak. But they really liked it because if you remember in the 1930s, Pittsburgh was black and grimy and sooty, and pilots actually who flew over Pittsburgh in the 1930s said that from the air it looked like a big black ball of ink. So you can imagine how happy Edgar and Lillian Kaufmann were to drive out to the cool green refuge of Falling Water and see the green ferns and the blooming rhododendron and hear the calming water of Bear Run Creek rushing under their house. It also was a wonderful salon for friends. and visiting visitors, people like Albert Einstein, Diego Rivera, and Frida Kahlo, and one of Edgar Kaufmann's very close friends, H.J. Jack Hines, came and stayed at Fallingwater.
But have you been there?
Oh,
I'm sure. The guest rooms are not palatial at all.
No, they're not.
I was surprised that they're not at all.
So this is a picture of Edgar and Lillian as they looked at the height of their power couple days. And you can see that Lillian is this sleek, elegant woman wearing a fur and the latest styles, and Edgar is very dapper, wearing the hat and the double-breasted coat. Lillian had her boutique. She was not a big proponent of budgets. When the budget would come, she would take it, she'd say, "What's that?" And her secretary would say, "Well, that's your budget." And she would rip it in half. That's what she thought of budgets. As we mentioned, she was buying all kinds of designer goods in Europe, very sophisticated woman. They sold in the Vendôme Swarovski crystal and Steuben glass and art, in addition to all the beautiful clothing. And she became a successful businesswoman. And you might think that her husband would be unhappy about that, because perhaps she was treading on his ground, but that was not the case. He was very supportive and very happy that she had her own business and was making a success of it.
So the low point of the marriage is the fact that Edgar supported his wife, but he also supported this woman, and her name and picture appeared in the local newspapers. She's Billy Scheibel. She operated a house of prostitution here in Pittsburgh, and Edgar was among her clients. Edgar cheated many times with women, paid and kept.
Well, that's a little known fact.
He also really liked technology, getting back on a more fit for the public consumption note. He really was into airplanes before they were being used commercially. In 1909, the Curtiss biplane was the first plane that was made, that was mass marketed. And he hung a full-size reproduction from the ceiling in Kaufmann's first floor, along with models of 6 other planes. And the next year, he had an exact replica of the Wright brothers airplane, hung from the first floor ceiling with its motor running and the propellers turning. He really liked cars, fast cars. He owned a lot of them in his lifetime. And in 1912, this was the fastest car in the world, the Mercedes Blitzen II, and he displayed it in Kaufmann store windows. In the 1940s, they displayed the Blitz buggy, which we know as the Jeep, which was made up in Butler. And after the war, they displayed, they had all this steel in Pittsburgh. From, the steel mills were going full blast during World War II. What are we going to do with all this steel? Well, why don't we build houses of them with it? We'll build houses entirely of steel. And the Kaufmanns thought that was a good idea, and they put them on display on the roof of the store. So you could go up and see these models of the steel air homes, which included a swimming pool.
Now, one of the things that the Kaufmann brothers were known for was that they were constantly adopting new innovations. We're all used to going into a store and looking at the price tag of the object that we're considering buying. But in the early days of the department store world, sort of in the 1870s, that's not how it worked. You might go in and say, well, gee, I'd like to buy this shawl. And the sales clerk would sort of assess, based on how well or how poorly you were dressed, what you could afford to pay for it. And then there would be sort of a bargaining that ensued, and you'd arrive at a price. Well, the Kaufmann brothers thought that was a waste of time. So they adopted a one price for all strategy. And they added price tags to merchandise And they constantly advertised this in the newspaper with florid and constant advertising. And of course, you can also see here that they were merchant tailors as well, something that Isaac and Jacob knew how to do when they first came to Western Pennsylvania.
Now in the store was almost more than a store. In addition to having all these different departments and all these kind of repairs that they would do for you for free, in addition to that, they hosted all kinds of shows, fashion shows, bridal shows, and in 1926 they hosted what amounted to a World's Fair in the store. They demonstrated all kinds of crafts. They had Beethoven's piano. I'm not really sure why they had Beethoven's piano, but they did. They had Lalique glass. They had Filipino women making embroidery in a native hut. They had rug weaving. They had electronic transmission of photographs, which we thought was sort of like an early fax machine. And they got their candy department to make a replica of the Fort Pitt blockhouse made entirely of chocolate and weighing 200 pounds. And they advertised all this in the most colorful language you can imagine. This is just a tiny little snippet. Brasses from fabled Baghdad and embroidered banners celebrating the might of Manchu emperors.
Okay, so by 1946, Edgar Kaufmann made a decision. He had kind of a tough decision to make. He could either pass the leadership of the store on to his younger loyal brother, Oliver Kaufmann, who was an executive in the store, or he could give it to this man here on the right, whose name is I.D. Wolf. I.D. Wolf was a powerhouse of a retailer, very smart, savvy executive, very involved in local Pittsburgh charities when he was an executive with Kaufmann's. But what Edgar decided to do was he decided to sell Kaufmann's in 1946 to the May Company, the May Department Store Company. He retained the title of president, and he retired to Palm Springs, California, where he spent a lot of time with his mistress, Grace Stoops. And by 1956, I.D. Wolf was dead, Edgar Kaufmann was dead, and so was Edgar Kaufmann's longtime wife, Lillian Kaufmann, who you see here in the picture. The last known Kaufmann family member to work at Kaufmann's was a gentleman by the name of John Wolf. He was there in the 1960s, and he discovered one day, much to his consternation, that someone else had been promoted over him. So he decided that it was time to leave and start his own business, which he did. He became very successful, and he actually funded the gym at the Jewish Community Center here in Pittsburgh. So he was a philanthropist in his own right.
Did he start Reisenstein's?
I don't think so. No.
So after World War II, stores started following people who were moving out. Many people were moving out of the city, which was considered dirty and crowded and not desirable. And they were moving into the suburbs, and the suburban lifestyle, casual, taking its cue from California, pools, barbecue in the backyard kind of thing. That was the cool thing. And so stores began following them. Department stores started following them. Now, the Kaufmanns were slow to do that. Not only were they slow to do that, but they believed that they were sort of a shopping mall themselves. They didn't think they needed to move into a mall because we have all the departments. Why should you want to go anywhere else? So they built freestanding stores. The first was in Monroeville, and then they built this store. Does anybody recognize this store?
Mount Lebanon?
It is. It is now the Galleria in Mount Lebanon, but originally it was just Kaufmann's. The Monroeville was in 1961. Mount Lebanon was in 1965, and then they built a store in the North Hills in 1966, and they spent the 1970s expanding these stores.
Stores in Monroeville, though, were part of the mall. It was not a freestanding store.
No, it
is
was-
No, originally,
exactly.
originally they built a freestanding store in Monroeville.
And it's
Yeah,
where Lowe's is now.
Right.
yeah,
Oh, that's where
yeah,
Lowe's is.
yeah.
And then where North Hills is a freestanding one.
Yes, yes. They actually, by the 1980s, it wasn't until like 1986 that Kaufmann's took over 3 Gimbel's locations in various malls here in Western Pennsylvania. And actually, Kaufmann's executives were surprised by the high level of sales that they did in malls. This picture here is a 1987 photo of Kaufmann's in the Monroeville Mall.
And from there, they expanded. They moved into Erie, they moved into Westmoreland County outside of Greensburg, to Beaver County in Ohio. They were in Steubenville, St. Clairsville, Youngstown, Cleveland, Allentown. In New York, they were in Rochester. In West Virginia, they were in Charleston. And in 1993, they hit a high. They had sales of $1.2 billion.
And they were called Kaufmann.
They were called Kaufmann.
It was all under the Maid Company.
It was all under the makeup.
They still kept the Kaufmann's name because I think they understood, you know, that brand loyalty, especially here, was key. You know, so now this very sad-looking building is the a 2018 photo of what used to be the Kaufmann's entrance at Century 3 Mall out in West Mifflin, which was, as you may recall, built over a slag heap. In 2002, that was sort of the beginning of the decline of Kaufmann's here in Western Pennsylvania. In 2002, May Company decided to merge Kaufmann's with its Filene's division. And what that meant was that they moved the executive operation up to Boston, Massachusetts, which was where Filene's was based. And they also eliminated 1,200 office jobs in downtown Pittsburgh, which was nearly 1% of the downtown workforce at that time in 2002. So if you went into Kaufmann's in the 2000s, which I did, you realized that service had really taken a hit. Selection, quality, just about everything suffered. Display suffered. You know, there were times when you would go in there and it would look sort of very bargain. Even the floors that were supposed to be selling high-end merchandise looked more like a bargain basement. But there was an effort to save downtown retail, and Laura will tell you about that.
That's right. And how many people remember being taken by their parents or grandparents downtown to shop? Yeah. And how many people could have imagined that downtown would not have any shopping? Well, neither could Mayor Tom Murphy. He thought that retail in downtown should be revived. So he used tax money to bring Lord & Taylor downtown, and where did they decide to, and to build a more centrally located store for Lazarus, which had bought out Horns by that time, to join Kaufmann's and Saks downtown and build sort of a downtown outdoor mall, if you will. He wanted to get Nordstrom to come downtown, but the Nordstrom family was friends with the Rooney family that owned the Steelers. And where are the Rooneys? They're on the north side. So where is Nordstrom today?
North Hills.
It's in Ross Park Mall on the north side. So it didn't get Nordstrom. To put Lord & Taylor downtown, what building would it go into? Well, they thought this building was a fine one. It was the Mellon Bank's original bank building, and it was a beautiful building with columns and chandeliers and marble. It was so lovely that it was called the Cathedral of Earning. However, to make it into a department store, they more or less jackhammered everything up and put everything else in the sub-basement. And within 5 years, the new stores were all closed. Lazarus was closed, Lord and Taylor was closed, and in fact, the other stores that remained were closing. Kaufmann's would be the last one.
So, as you can see here, this particular picture is sort of a nice visual contrast. You can see here that there is a Macy's marquee, but above it you can see the Kaufmann's name engraved in stone in the building. So Kaufmann's was rebranded as Macy's in 2006, and then in 2015, in September of 2015, that was the closing of the store. Some employees of the store decided that they would set up Santa's chair one last time. So they put Santa's chair in the lobby of One Oxford Center, and people came down and brought their kids to see Santa. And they had a list of who was naughty and nice next to Santa's chair. And you know who topped the naughty list? Macy's.
So we thought we would, oh, I'm so sorry. We thought we'd just go through some of the beloved traditions from Kaufmann's. One was the Christmas windows. And this was the kind of sight you might see in front of the annual Christmas windows at Kaufmann's. A child with what looks like an Instamatic camera, and this is a Macy's employee in 2013 setting up the display for the magic of Christmas. That was the theme that year. They often had very sort of general themes, like the magic of Christmas or a holiday Christmas.
Christmas around the world.
Christmas around, yeah. But they would somehow take these very general themes and make very creative window displays out of them. You can see that he is behind a black curtain. And on light of night, they would, all at once, all the department stores would bring down the curtains, or perhaps a woman dressed as a fairy would tap the window with her wand, and the curtains would come down, and the crowds would surge forward to see the windows. And when we spoke to window designers, they said a good window display for Christmas was when the next morning the windows had nose prints and handprints all over them.
I should just add that it was not easy being a window dresser, a window designer. Those windows were not heated and they were not air conditioned. So if you worked in them in the winter, you were freezing. If you worked in them in the summer, you were sweating. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about the clock. Here you can see, if you look on the left of this picture, that this gentleman looks almost as if he's part of the clock, when in fact he is actually polishing the brass on the clock. The clock is a historic landmark. It's still there at 5th and Smithfield. And we believe that the clock was made by a well-known company out of New York called Edward F. Caldwell and Company, which made clocks for Andrew Carnegie's home and Henry Clay Frick's home and a host of famous landmarks. At any rate, the next one is, yeah. So here is the clock in more modern, a more modern look at it. And here in this black and white picture, if you look very carefully, you can see that this woman has climbed up on the clock, and she is pointing up her index finger to say, we're number one. They are celebrating the 1970 win of the World Series by the Pittsburgh Pirates. We're not going to see that again in our lifetimes.
A little political here.
So today, not good clicker card. Today, the Kaufmann's building is of course no longer Kaufmann's. However, It is the
Target.
site of some retail, some rare retail downtown. Target, and they're building space for the Burlington Coat Factory there. It is also the site of an Even Hotel, and they have more than 100 apartments there. There's a waffle shop, and in the lobby, the lobby is made in the style of Kaufmann's in its golden age, with many photos, historic photos of it.
So we're going to end with this last picture of Edgar Kaufmann. This is a wonderful picture of Edgar Kaufmann in his office, in Kaufmann's. This office was designed for him by Frank Lloyd Wright out of, I think it was cedar, and it had a distinctive pattern to it. And he's leaning over a set of blueprints here. Edgar was happiest when he was building. But the point I want to make is that he was much more than a merchant prince or a master builder. He was really an important civic and cultural leader here in Western Pennsylvania. Because he was willing to take a chance on Frank Lloyd Wright and have him build Falling Water, hundreds of thousands of people come to Western Pennsylvania every year to see Falling Water. It was an innovation on Edgar's part to hire him. It is always the #1 venue that people want to see when they come here. So we can be grateful to Edgar Kaufmann for many things, for elevating the taste of shoppers and for turning retailing into a profession, and for also giving us one of the most beautiful and fascinating houses in the world. We'll be happy to take your questions and hear your Kaufmann's memories. Yes? Thank you.
So you briefly referenced Oliver Kaufmann?
Oliver,
His
yes,
brother?
right.
Did you ever do research about his home and where it fit? It
Yes.
still exists today and how it's used?
It's, we know that it's in Squirrel Hill, that he had a home in Squirrel Hill.
He had that, but his home also became the beginning of Robert Morris College.
230-acre campus was his home in Newton Township.
Yes, it was
And
his
it's still
farm.
there, and the original house.
The original
is
house
there.
is still there, and they use it, yes,
Right.
and it's still beautiful.
So my second question, real briefly, with all these brothers and all their offspring, the grandchildren, are there any Kaufmanns left at all in the Pittsburgh area? I find that impossible to believe. There's no one left.
There was Oliver's daughter Judy, I don't know what,
Well,
do you know about her?
no, we don't believe that there are any left in Pittsburgh, but if there are, they would not be direct descendants of Edgar and Lillian. They would be,
They could be from the brothers. and
Yeah.
cousins.
they would be, but they would be so far down the line that they would no longer have known them.
There's wolves.
There are wolves.
Yeah, there are wolves, yes.
John Wolfe
Yes.
died, and his children live in different cities,
Yeah.
but they did not know the store.
But they knew the history.
Yes, they did. In fact, we met one of the Wolf family descendants at Rhodef when we spoke at Rhodef. She's an Arnheim, Kathy Arnheim.
Kathy,
Yeah, yeah,
her sister.
yeah. And they do know the history of the Wolf family. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I.D. was Kathy's father or grandfather?
Grandfather.
Grandfather,
Yeah. Grandfather. Yes. Yes.
Now, did you find in your research that the Kaufmann family was bothered in any way by Frank Lloyd Wright's anti-Semitism?
You know, I think that Edgar Kaufmann was especially good at dealing with Wright. You know, what Wright could be such a prima donna and such a drama queen. And I think Edgar was really great at mollifying that. I don't think that, you know, I mean, Edgar Kaufmann certainly encountered his share of anti-Semitism in his life. He saw it, you know, with the Mellons and Ligonier. He saw it, you know, in many other places in Pittsburgh. But I think that, I don't know that he ever really, that it came up in his conversations with Wright. I think what they were fighting over mostly was how the house was going to be built and whether or not there was, Edgar was concerned that there be enough structural steel in falling water. He was worried that it was going to collapse. And there are letters back and forth between the two men that deal with that. I'm going to let Laura talk about this too.
Well, I think that anti-Semitism was much more common then, and I don't think that would have surprised Edgar in the least. In fact, when they raced horses, they weren't allowed to be on Rolling Rock, you know, to be on the grounds of Rolling Rock stables. When they brought guests, they had to like do a tailgate party outside and watch the races from outside. So the fact that Frank Lloyd Wright was anti-Semitic would have been par for the course.
The fact that he went to Shadyside
Right.
those years. I mean,
And there was a quota, there was a Jewish quota at Shadyside.
Okay.
Well, not only did Edgar Kaufmann go to Shadyside, but they said their son, Edgar Kaufmann Jr., went to Shadyside. Yeah.
His grades were not as good.
Yeah, his grades were not nearly as good. And we actually recently found, a local historian found a picture of Edgar Kaufmann in the Shadyside Academy yearbook. And I think we found out that he ran track, right, at Shadyside? Yeah. Yeah. No, but it was, I agree with you, it was unusual for that time.
So he was used to.
Yeah, I think he probably encountered his share of it. Yes. Yes.
Do you have any insight into how their family name got to be pronounced the way we pronounce it now?
Kaufmann's?
Right.
Well, the name Kaufmann is German for merchant.
But they would have never said, in Germany, they would never pronounce that Kaufmann.
How would they pronounce it?
Kaufmann.
Kaufmann. Okay.
I think
Well,
it's
New
just
Yorkers
an
say
anglicization.
Kaufman.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
I think it's just an anglicization of
Okay.
the
Yeah.
pronunciation.
Yeah. And of course, you have to factor in the Western Pennsylvania accent. Yes. Yes, Tony.
From our chat group, the first question, I read your remarkable book. I read that a man by the last name of Gabor from Hungary came to Pittsburgh to work for the Kaufmann.
That's right.
Right.
And is he related to the Gabor sisters?
Not that we're aware of. Not that we know.
Lacey Gabor.
He was Laszlo, and his first name was Laszlo, and his last name was Gabor. And, he was actually one of many Jews that the Kaufmanns brought over from Europe and basically saved their lives. Yeah, because he was from Austria. I have to say, we did not pursue that line of questioning when we were doing research. So I can't say for sure whether or not Laszlo Gabor had any relation to the Gabor sisters. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, there's somebody down here.
Yeah, Girl Scouts of southwestern Pennsylvania had a Camp Henry Kaufmann.
Yes.
Was that from the Kaufmann family?
Yes, Henry Kaufmann was the a brother who lived the longest. He outlived all of his brothers, and he lived very frugally. Each one of the Kaufmann brothers, their share of the business amounted to $10 million. And Henry Kaufmann, after his wife died, committed suicide, he basically spent the rest of his life giving away his fortune. And not only are there Henry Kaufmann camps for Girl Scouts here, but in the state of New York, there are Henry Kaufmann campgrounds. So he did a lot to, as a philanthropist. He was very intent on giving his money away to benefit, other human beings. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, my father is a Holocaust survivor who came here in 1949 and ended up working for Kaufmann's department store as a tailor until about 1963 when he opened up his own tailor shop here in Squirrel Hill for about 25 years. So.
What was his name?
Drucker is the last name, D-R-U-C-K-E-R, Harry Drucker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he had what? No, I think at that point the Wolves owned the store and so he knew them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he was a fixture here in Squirrel Hill for about 25 years.
And was his store on Forbes or Murray?
Murray, near the corner of Hobart.
Oh, okay,
There's a little tailor shop there now,
okay.
and that's like a few iterations after that.
And did he have good memories of Kaufmann's?
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, even after he left them and set up his own store, he was a tailor in Kaufmann's department store.
Okay.
He met my mother because her boss used to come to him to get his suits fixed. And they set them up on a blind date. And
The rest is history.
and the rest, yeah, here I am, right? We used to go down to Kaufmann's department store either on Monday or Thursday nights after he closed the shop, but the store was still open downtown. And I have memories of going down there on the streetcars.
Right. A lot of people got there that way.
Yeah.
In fact, it's interesting that you brought that up. I just want to say that one of the reasons that Kaufmann's located itself where it did at Smithfield and Fifth was because it knew that the brothers knew that the tracks were there and that those tracks would bring customers into their stores. So they were very strategic about where they located. The other reason they chose that location was because it was near a courthouse and a post office. So they knew there would be a lot of foot traffic. Yeah. I think this gentleman in the back has had his hand up for a while.
Did you delve into any of the dining in the building, like the TikTok and the bakery and the other restaurants?
You know, at one time, Kaufmann's had, I think it was 11 or 13 places to eat. And yes, we do address all of that in the book. I think what most people do remember most fondly is the TikTok and eating, you know, the chicken a la king and the mile high ice cream pie. And a lot of people who worked in the store would go to the TikTok before the store actually opened, I think, to have coffee and have breakfast. A lot of the buyers and managers. And so, but of course there was also fine dining at Michael's and at Edgar's, which I think those were up higher in the store. Yeah, white tablecloth restaurants. And then there was a hot dog stand called Standing Room Only. And SRO, yeah, and it was very popular with people, especially downtown at lunchtime. I don't know, I'm not exactly sure where it was located. Yeah.
Closed, there was always food on that balcony.
Yeah.
Right as you walked from the streetcar to the bus stop.
And then, of course, the arcade bakery had the thumbprint cookies. You know, this was a big deal. People still, like to eat thumbprint cookies. So, yes, Tony.
Another chat question. Do you know why the Kaufmanns chose to settle in Pittsburgh?
We don't. We can, however, theorize as to why they came here. They would have heard about the Jewish community here, I think, through German newspapers, and they knew that there was that there were wholesalers on Fifth Avenue where they could buy, and they could restock and then go out and peddle again.
I don't think that Jacob was the tailor, so he didn't have any background to allow him to work in what they called the rag trade in New York. So that meant that he had to go further out, and they knew that he knew that the mills were hiring people, so he could peddle in Western Pennsylvania.
In the Jewish Community Center, there's a beautiful full-length portrait. Is that Lillian?
No, that is the portrait we showed. That was the first one.
That's Irene.
That's Irene. And it says, there's a plaque on there that says circa, I forget what the first date
I
is.
think it came
circa something to 1907, and that's not correct. That picture is not circa. Those are her birth and death dates.
Yeah.
So.
Passed it a million times.
Yes.
Yes.
Another chat question. From your book, a famous scientist who was a friend of Kaufmann's and relocated here from Europe and moved to O'Hare Township. I guess the question is, who was that?
Einstein. Do they mean Einstein?
Do they mean Einstein?
No, he didn't go to O'Hare Township.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
The next question is, Edgar Kaufmann's office now in the Carnegie Museum?
No, it is in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And why? Because that's where Edgar Jr. donated it, and it's not on display.
And we want it back.
We want it back, yes we do.
It should be here, damn
It
it.
should, as well as those murals, by gosh.
Peru got their stuff
The
back.
last chat question is, why did he not leave the business to his son? Why someone else?
His son didn't want it.
Yeah, his son
Yeah.
didn't want the
His
business.
son wanted to be an artist,
Yeah.
so.
He became an architect.
Let me just add something about so that sort of, builds on that question that came from the chat. Edgar Kaufmann Jr. lived a wonderful life living in New York. He had a partner named Paul Mayen, M-A-Y-E-N. Paul Mayen was a gifted designer and actually developed a whole sort of line of businesses. Paul Mayen actually designed the Visitor Center at Fallingwater. And when he died, his ashes were scattered there, as were Edgar Kaufmann Jr.'s ashes. But the point I was trying to make was that Edgar Kaufmann and Paul Mayen, when they lived in New York, they had this fabulous apartment, they had an amazing art collection, they had a second home in Garrison, New York. I think Edgar Kaufmann Jr. wanted to go off and live his own life. He was not interested in being the son who inherited the store. He was much more interested in sort of getting away from Western Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Something higher, more cultured.
Something higher, more cultured. Yeah.
Where are Edgar Sr. and Lillian buried?
They're both buried at Fallingwater. There's a special crypt, and the doors of the crypt were actually designed by Alberto Giacometti. At the
That's not part of the tour.
They never talk about that.
They never talk about it because they don't want people going to the crypt. And if you're at Fallingwater and you say to a docent, "I'd like to see the crypt," they'll say, "Well, we don't. That's not on the tour." That's what they'll tell you, and they won't tell you where it is either.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to say that from childhood on, I spent a lot of time in Kaufmann's without realizing the beauty of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, one last question.
There's a building in Polish Hill that I ran across a number of years ago, and it says Emma Kaufmann Clinic, and a little research, it seems like it might actually be the very first building that ultimately became UPMC.
Yes.
You
I
are
thought there
correct.
should be a historical sign there, because it's and right now I think it's like apartments or something, I don't know.
I don't even know if it's in use right now.
Yeah, we couldn't determine whether or not it was in use, but it does say,
Emma
I think
Kaufmann.
it says
Kaufmann
Emma
Clinic.
Kaufmann.
Right.
It said Emma Kaufmann, I
Yeah.
think there was a clinic there,
Right,
and if you do a little Googling,
right,
it was somehow related to Western University, which was
yes,
Pitz,
yeah.
and
That's great.
When did they build this big department store, so many floors? What year did they build downtown? Where we know now?
Oh, what year did they move downtown? It was in the late 1870s. Yeah, the late
They built
1870s.
this big, so many floors, I mean, what, 11 floors or something?
Yeah, 1 million square feet of selling space. It was the 5th largest department store in the nation.
But they built it piece by piece
Yeah.
over the years, and sometimes knocking down one part and building another,
Yeah.
and joining two parts together. And,
Right.
yeah.
I just wanted to address what you said earlier, and that was is that there is a building in Polish Hill that has the name Emma Kaufmann on it. And Isaac Kaufmann, who was Emma's widower, gave the money for that building. And it was a building that was initially used by what we know now as UPMC. Yeah. We'll be happy to sign books. Oh, one last question.
If Kaufmann's is the 5th largest department store, what was Marshall Field's?
God, I couldn't tell you, but oh, they were certainly one of the bigger ones. I think most people think of Marshall Fields and they think of Wanamaker's in Philadelphia, where people met under the Bronze Eagle, and yeah, Bloomingdale's maybe, Macy's, yeah, Macy's in Herald Square, yeah, Bergdorf Goodman, Neiman Marcus, yeah, all of those, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marylynne and Laura. It was a most enlightening presentation. Thank you all for your questions. Next month, February 14th, our guest speaker will be Lizzie Barker, who's the executive director of the Frick. So she'll be talking about the Frick's past, present, and future. So a nice way to spend Valentine's Day, Tuesday, February 14th. So be sure to pick up the Squirrel Hill Historical Society calendar, as well as the book that Laura